Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us live. For those of you who are not joining us on November 20th, 2020, the link will be made accessible on our social media and website, so you can access it at a different time. I'll send it out to those who have asked for it as well. My name is Ashley Thompson. I am Resource Development Director at Ouachita Children, Youth, and Family Services. I'm also a part of the Public Awareness Prevention Program, where we have 2 grants that focus on underage drinking and locking up your medications and marijuana use in a 5-county area. And Ouachita Children, Youth, and Family Services, formerly known as Ouachita Children's Center, has expanded our programs. And so we expanded our name. And part of those programs is Ouachita Youth Center. And Libby is joining us from Ouachita Youth Center now. So I'm going to do a brief little intro about Livvey. So Livvey Rurup identifies as she and hers, is the Youth Services Director at Ouachita Children, Youth, and Family Services, where she leads the Drop-In Day Center, street outreach and homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing programs for a 4-county area. Livvey has over a decade of experience working in programs that benefit youth and their families in government and nonprofit settings. She received a Bachelor's of Sociology from Arkansas State University and is currently studying for her Master's in Public Service for Nonprofit Administration and her certification as a child and youth professional, which is very beneficial to us because she gets to bring those very clever projects. She is passionate about working with youth who are exiting or aging out of systems of care, such as juvenile justice or foster care, to help them find their place in caring and stable community. We also have other people that work with Ouachita Children, Youth, and Family Services on today. So if your questions at the end are about any of our services, we are happy to answer those. But this is specifically for Homelessness Awareness Month. And I guess it's Runaway Youth Awareness Month as well. So that kind of goes hand in hand. And we're focusing on substance use and those who are experiencing chronic homelessness. So Livvey, thank you for coming today. My eyes are all over the place because I'm trying to do 47 things, but I'm now looking at you. So if there's anything else that you'd like us to know about yourself. Favorite colors, walks on the beach.
Thanks for having me, and good morning. I've worked, as I mentioned, in youth-related services for a little over a decade now, some of which were directly related to homelessness, almost all of them with at-risk youth who overall have a higher chance of being runaway or homeless. And then I've been at Ouachita Children, Youth, and Family Services for a little over 2 years now, where I have been working directly in it. And I grew up here in Hot Springs. I lived here until I left for college and then came back afterwards. And so it was really eye-opening to see what is going on in our community and in the counties surrounding us that I was just not aware of, going about, my usual life, going to school and having a job and stuff. So it's been one thing to know it's there, but to also have that proactive attitude. And I'm really proud of our community for saying, we're not going to ignore it like some places do, that we're going to take care of the kids who are here.
Yes, you're right. I grew up here as well. And what I knew and what I thought I knew and what I know now are not the same thing. Yeah. So let's get started. First question. And it seems like a really obvious question and a really obvious answer, but I think you're probably going to surprise a few people. Libby, what is homelessness?
So there actually are about 1 million different definitions, depending on, which group you're talking to. The generally accepted term is the lack of stable, safe, appropriate, and permanent housing. So it can be literal homelessness, where someone is living in a car or out on the streets in a tent, but it can also be individuals who are couch surfing, staying at a friend's house repeatedly, living in buildings that aren't meant as housing, so staying in storage units or breaking into closets of places and bouncing around. It can also be people who just go from shelter to shelter to shelter. So it can look like a lot of different things.
And I don't think most realize that if you're young, say you're 19, 20 college age and you're couch surfing, that's considered homelessness because you think, well, I've got a place to stay. Well, but do you? Is that stable housing? Is that what we consider stable housing or a home? So thank you. What's the connection between homelessness and alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs and marijuana use? Do you see a connection between homelessness and substance use?
There definitely is. And substance use is disproportionately affects runaway and homeless youth. The statistics are pretty staggering, and about 69% of runaway or homeless youth meet the criteria for at least one substance use disorder. If they are experiencing a mental health issue, it goes way, way up. And then having either of those, or what they say, coexisting, is very high. What I've seen here and in general is substance abuse is more often a result of homelessness with youth than it is the other way around. And then with adults, it tends to be alcoholism or substance abuse that then leads to homelessness. And I think a lot of that has to do with coping. Young kids being on their own, trying to handle situations that are far beyond their appropriate developmental level, all of that extra stress and feelings of abandonment, especially if they have untreated mental health issues. They try to deal with those by drinking or with drugs, and then that just leads and kind of rolls into further difficulties finding housing.
Do you find, this is kind of a little off the cuff a little bit, but your answers are triggering questions now. Do you find that mental illness does play a big part in the substance use and homelessness as a co-occurring situation? Do you find mental illness plays a big part in that for youth?
It does. Any untreated behavioral, mental or emotional issue going on with the youth seems to be one of the major things that will cause stress in their home, and that the deterioration of the home relationships for youth, whether it be because they've started using substances, a breakdown in communication, not feeling accepted by them, or constant moving for like children who are in the foster care system, all of those things affect their feeling of belonging in the home. And especially untreated mental health issues. That just, that can create a lot of difficulties. It can be difficult for a parent who doesn't have a mental health background, like most of us don't, to try to help a youth in those situations. And so when they don't reach out for support, it gets more difficult for both the parent and the child.
That makes sense. Do you find that it's true that people experiencing homelessness are at higher risk than the overall population for being a victim of a crime, having a mental health condition, and having substance use disorder or alcoholism?
Definitely. Statistically, it's been said that about 76% of runaway or homeless youth are victims of violent crime. And that's amazingly high. When I read that one, because that's not only saying, oh, any crime, that's actual violent crime. And so just to kind of compare, overall youth, typically around 40% will say, in the past year, I've been the victim of a crime. But almost all of those are property crimes. So I've had something damaged or I've had something stolen, whereas runaway and homeless youth, almost 80% have experienced a violent crime in the past year, and the majority of those more than once.
And do you find, or do you think that maybe this is a guess on your part, but do you think that maybe a lot of the crimes, the violent crimes against them maybe are underreported or not reported at all? So do you think that number would actually be higher if we had accurate counts and numbers?
Oh, for sure. The national average is a guess, of course. But they say about 20% of the violent crimes perpetrated against runaway and homeless youth are reported. And then just from what I've experienced in the last 2 years with youth here, I would say that's even a high guess on it, because it's very rare a young adult or a teenager who's been on the street for even more than a week hasn't already experienced some kind of violent crime.
That's incredible to think that you can be there for a short time. So you think as a runaway who's escaping problems that you're going to find safety or solace on the streets for a couple of nights maybe, and it's not quite the case. And then the difficulty finding resources and reaching out have gotten harder.
Mm-hmm.
That's really difficult to think about. Why are there such large numbers of youth experiencing homelessness and using substances? Do you think there's a solid reason?
I think it's, each experience is different with every single youth that I've talked to. The factors that have led to the feeling that they either want to run away or why they were kicked out of their housing situation. But some of the overarching themes that I have seen would be if their family has used substances, alcohol or drugs, that creates instability, and of course increases the chance that the youth is going to use substances themselves, and then that breakdown there has caused a lot of it. Peer use, if they are hanging out with individuals who are using substances, they support one another and they create a network, of course, of like, I'll hide this for you, or you can come to my house and then we'll use it. One of the things I see is a lot more of actual adults who use, and then they'll have, a party for kids or what have you, and there'll be that cool adult who provides alcohol or who provides drugs. And, I don't want to be one of those people that's out there like trying to create fear with every single adult, but it is a dangerous situation because some of those adults are trying to get kids hooked on drugs. They're drug dealers hiding themselves as adults who are cool, and they'll provide these drugs to get them interested in it. Then they can use, the kid has used it, and they can use that, like blackmail them almost. You can't tell people I'm selling drugs because you used them at my house that one time. And then once they get that relationship going, oftentimes it can lead to, okay, well, now you have to do this favor for me. And now they're hanging out with kids who are getting into deeper and more serious substance use.
So in Region 8, we have, all across the state of Arkansas, we have the Arkansas Prevention Needs Assessment Survey, and that surveys school-age kids, 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And what we try to do is get 100% participation from all of the schools, and it can tell us anything from risk factors to protective factors. But generally speaking, we know county data and regional data and state data for substance use in youth. What we don't capture is the homeless youth or those who are experiencing couch surfing or moving schools or dropouts or things like that. We do have a little bit of that gap there. But we do know that the onset of drinking and using marijuana can be as early as 11 or 13 years old, and 13 being the average in our region, which is shocking. But then you think if that's alcohol or something like that, that like you were saying, the parents are providing it, it's a norm for them. It's normal for them to experience this in their house, especially in the rural settings. When you're hunting or you're at deer camp or something like that, the alcohol is provided because, if you're old enough to hunt and carry a firearm and things like that, then you should be old enough to drink. So that's the mindset that's going on. A little bit of digging, and it can be a felony if you're caught providing alcohol to minors, and a lot of people don't realize the consequences of providing to minors. But like you said, if you're in some sort of situation where you're trying to manipulate it as an adult to get the kids to use this for whatever agenda you have, I doubt you care very much, or you probably already have some sort of background that's gotten you in trouble before. It could very well be the case. So it's interesting that you're bringing it up that way, because we have a tendency to think of our kids as the kids who are in school. but there's so many of the kids that we're missing that are not active in school, there's so much more going on than just having parties and there's beer at the house. There's other things happening for not for prevention, for providing those substances to children. So that begs the question, and you kind of answered it earlier. What do you think came first when it comes to those who are experiencing homelessness and their substance use? It's like the chicken or the egg. Do you think that them using the substances has led them to having unstable housing and a lack of resources, or do you think the lack of resources and unstable housing has caused them to direct their lives towards substance use?
It is a little bit of both. You know, the younger that you get, it tends to be more of the unstable housing. They lose that, and then it does not take very long until they start using substances, either to fit in with the people who are providing them with food or transportation. And then as you get older, it kind of evens out, and it does become one of those, you're not really even sure. One leads to the other quite a bit. It's very unfortunate, the rates of youth who I work with or I have seen the last 2 years who are sober, you know, at the time that they lose housing. And if for whatever reason they are not placed into a more stable environment pretty quickly, how many of them do start using substances, even if it's just smoking cigarettes, you know, to deal with stress, or drinking every once in a while because where they're staying is having a party, those kinds of things. But it goes pretty quickly. And I think it's a lot of it's coping skills, whether it's they're unhappy in their home currently and adults are using these unhealthy coping skills, or the added stress, like we mentioned, of having unstable housing, having untreated mental or emotional issues. It's like self-medicating as well. And then of course, if you are using substances as a youth, it makes it a lot easier to get kicked out of some transitional housing situations. And so having programs available that realize those things are pretty much just going to happen together. The exception is a youth who doesn't have a mental health or substance issue while facing housing.
Another side question that it just kind of triggered. Do you think that stable housing and accessible resources could turn around somebody's substance use issues quickly?
I think it could definitely help. Communities that have more of a continuum system, meaning it starts really early with early child care supports, and then they have not only like rapid rehousing into permanent, but they have transitional that can help with mental health, specifically for substance abuse, specifically for maybe LGBTQ or other issues that have led to the breakdown in their housing, are all very important. Trying to take on any one part of this in a silo is not very effective.
Glad I asked that question. Thank you. Okay, so you had just mentioned, and I wrote it down on my notes to remind myself to ask you, but you mentioned it. So the LGBTQ community, are you seeing any one community that's more affected than the other? And especially in the community that you serve, but even nationally, when you go to your meetings and your conferences and seminars and all that kind of stuff, what are you seeing as far as targeting specific communities? Is anyone affected more than the other?
Within the LGBTQ?
Just any community, but I did have on my notes to ask you about that community specifically, but do you find any community sticks out more than the other that it's just kind of astounding that people don't realize that they're being affected by this so much?
You know, here there are still not as many supports for LGBTQ youth as in some larger areas. I worked in similar work in the Denver metro area. And as I moved there and was living there, they increased them a lot. And it made a humongous impact on just the community support and understanding for LGBTQ youth. It can cause housing instability if the parents or caregivers feel a different way about gender roles or what have you with a youth. But overall, even if they come from a house that's not very accepting or supportive, if the community provides support and there are safe and trusting adults there that still say, no, you know, we're here for you. We want you to have high self-esteem. We want to see you be successful and help to fill in any gaps that might be existing, then they still have high rates of success in life, of going on, getting their GED or diploma, finding good and high paying jobs. And so it is really any issue that's within your community, if you face it as a community, it's something you're going to be able to handle. But if you try to keep it all within your family or try to keep it all as something you don't face, it's going to be pretty impossible, you know, for any one or two people to try to take on.
And I know a lot of people, especially recently in the past couple of years, we've focused a lot, especially in mental health clinics, on ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. And so it's easy to Google what that Quizlet kind of looks like, and you can do it on yourself and you can figure out what the traumas they are discussing as far as ACEs are concerned. But not many people realize there's a flip side to that there's the protective factors quiz too. So if you have a certain number of protective factors, then it can kind of predict that you will not be as likely to develop cancer by a certain age, or that you can get a GED or a diploma or have a high paying job or successful family unit in the future. So I'm glad you brought that up, that, you know, even though the communities are impacted, if the community and the resources are available, then it can actually change and stop the cycle from continuing and going forward. So that is the perfect segue. What resources are available?
So within our community, so Garland County and the surrounding areas, we have resources available. Many through your school will be most accessible. If the youth you're concerned about is not attending school, the district resources are still available to you. They have McKinney-Ventos, who are liaisons for each school district. And they have services and programs that they can help to get the youth back into school. And once they are in school, to personalize their experience, taking into account the difficulties outside, you know, of the school to help them still be successful. Here we have quite a few community-based programs for youth. I know, of course, the pandemic has a lot of these things working in different ways, and a lot of it you can't do in person anymore. But really getting your kid or any youth that you see who's at risk for substance abuse, mental health, or housing instability, your best resources is the community itself. And a lot of people are like, oh, that sounds kind of hippy dippy. But whether it be organizations like Ouachita Children, Youth, and Family Services, who have after school programs for kids, or in your town you have a Boys and Girls Club, just getting them involved in hobbies that they're interested in, and especially if those are socially based hobbies, like you said, is one of the highest protective factors, no matter what they're facing. We can't control what a young adult experiences, those traumatic things, but we can build a community that has buffers and has supports for when they occur. You know, here we have in Hot Springs the Drop-In, which is where I currently am, and it is a place where youth 24 or under can come in. They can take showers, they can have a snack, We can get them bus passes if they're trying to search for jobs or need to go get, like go to a therapist. They can do their laundry. It's really low barrier, which is what we found the community needed, a place where youth can come in and just get out of the weather without the expectation of, okay, well now you've signed up for a 12-week program, or you're going to have to answer 5 sheets of really personal questions just to get a little bit of help. And so we also have street outreach, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The same services, but the team goes out onto the streets where youth are, and then tries to slowly build relationships with them through trust, mostly through providing needs, getting them clothing, food, those kinds of things, until they realize, oh, okay, this person has my best interest in mind. And then we start working on what they tell us are the largest issues for why they're not in housing right now.
And I know you probably have these off the top of your head, and you've told me a million times, but me and numbers are not friends, so I'm not going to pretend to know this. But can you give us a sense of how many you have served in these capacities, even in the past couple of weeks or month or so? And since you've been doing this for a couple of years now, do you see people are going to assume that the need is greater during the holidays? Do you necessarily feel like that's true?
You know, this year's a little weird with school being out. It's really changed how we've seen the need in youth. Typically, what we have is when school is out. So if that's over the holidays, yes, but over the summer especially, many youth who you wouldn't otherwise know are homeless because they're still going to school, they're still eating, they're still doing their work, they take a shower at the gym, they just walk themselves home or take a bus somewhere, and then you don't see them. It's a little harder to hide when school's out. And so there is a little bit over the holidays, but in this community, summertime, and then that being doubled up with if they're living outside, it just gets too hot to live outside, you know, by the time July rolls around. And so you do start seeing more youth trying to just sit in the gas station or sit at the library or somewhere to cool off.
Give us a sense of survival kits, what they look like, and like how many you would give out in a month or something like that. And I know that you and I know this, but those who are watching won't necessarily, that when we have to do our reporting for things like this, there's different ways to report that you've seen somebody, that they've actually been in front of you. How you report is usually first, middle, last names and where they're from and all that kind of stuff, but you guys get a little more freedom on how you report. So like new encounters, not just overall, but new encounters, are you seeing a lot coming up, and what are the survival kits like?
So first with the survival kits, those are typically backpacks or like drawstring style bags that we fill with hygiene products. So toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, all those good things. We put a few snacks in there. We have tarps, sleeping bags, and tents that can be attached, or they can also have, if they need those. It has resource information for if they need mental health or substance abuse assistance. If they need a bus pass, we give them those. Ziploc bags are super, super popular. We probably go through 1 million a year when they're living outside. Keeping things dry is really important. So we give them those. So many homeless youth have dogs for companionship and safety. And so we give out dog food a lot. We notice that if they go to Salvation Army or Jackson House and get a meal, they'll end up giving about half of their meal to their companion animal. And so we want them to eat that food. And so we've started giving out dog food or pet food with quite a few of those things as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned companion animals for protection too, because you can see them on the side of the street and you see that they have a new puppy or a dog or something, and you think, oh well, maybe that's for companionship, maybe it's for warmth, when they're snuggled up and sleeping. Maybe it's a ploy to get more money out of the people who are stopped at that stoplight. I got to be honest, and I haven't considered it as a safety measure. I mean, that dog's going to alert you if somebody's near your tent or near your station. And that's a really good point that you bring up. And then providing dog food makes perfect sense, because I have to be honest, the way I am with my kids and the way I am with my animals, I would probably give my meal to them too. So now it's a win-win. Everybody gets food. And yeah. So speaking of that, what are the barriers that you see for youth, especially youth who may be under the influence, who are using substances? What are the barriers you see for them for getting help?
Well, the substance abuse can immediately be a barrier. If you have a program that says you can't come in unless you're sober, you've immediately knocked out a lot of the people you are trying to help. And so not putting into place policies that might actually run away the very people you're trying to help. Being understanding that taking that first step is so difficult and takes so much bravery on their part to say, I know you're not sober right now, but you can sit here, we can get you something to eat. And when you're ready to talk about things, we can start working on that, because building that relationship's the most important part. Most of the youth, especially if they have experienced chronic homelessness, so repeated homelessness, they do not think very highly of adults. The people they are experiencing are not their friends and don't have their best interest in mind. And so it can be a slow game at first to say, no, you're here, you're safe. The things that we want to help you with are to help you grow. And then, teenagers are not always in the best mood and always have the best attitudes, as we all know. And as adults, we forget that very quickly.
I feel personally attacked right now. I was a lovely teenager.
Yeah. And so just realizing and trying to, remind yourself that their whole social world is different than ours. What they value is different, and not trying to judge or treat teenagers and kids like they are adults. Not talking about what kind of high-paying job are you going to get and trying to motivate them with that all the time, because as a teenager, like, I don't care, if I ever get a job. And so motivating them and relating to them on their terms. And most of them, what they really want is connection. They've lost that, and that's the biggest issue for them. And they know that. They know if they had some caring adults, things could be really, really different, but it hasn't gone well for them. And so putting aside what not having those permanent connections has caused them to do, like develop unhealthy behaviors of any kind, looking past those and realizing what the root issue and cause is so important. And unfortunately, not all service providers are very youth-centered or trauma-informed in those ways. And they'll say, you're not a good fit, for this program, or you're too high risk for some of the other people that we tried to take in. And it does become a situation where you say, well, if there's no one in the community who will treat those people, what do we expect them to do?
Sure. That's a very good point too. And when we're speaking of barriers to get help and barriers for resources, or maybe lack of resources, and we talked earlier about, the protective factors that we find during the APNA surveys and having that community connection. Do you find that the protective factors, like the social peer groups that we just talked about a little bit earlier, and there being some sort of way to protect the kids before, during, and after events happen, regardless of where they are? Like you said, if your barrier is that you are currently under the influence and you can't come in, how are you going to help them not be under the influence? So do you find, with all that considered, do you find prevention is an integral part of stopping seeing so many youth come into your services?
Absolutely. You know, it's much easier to prevent these situations than it is to try to intervene and to treat them. Even if it seems like it's a lot of time and a lot of effort for kids that you don't think will experience some of these things. It's all of our kids, kids from the affluent neighborhoods with two married parents. It's kids of all races from every part of our community who are going to face some of the situations that can lead to using substances and all the way to being run away or homeless. And so not making assumptions about what people are experiencing and just saying, we want everyone to know why it's important to try to keep your kids sober, why it's important to keep them connected to connected to your community. Because it is, like I said, most of the substance use is a coping issue with the homeless youth. And the more of those adverse things they experience, it's a compounding factor. And so they get kicked out, they start using substances. The substances lead to more negative experiences, and it just snowballs from there. And undoing that damage while trying to get a youth to focus on making progress it's very, very hard.
Those are all the questions we have, but I want to remind everybody that there are prevention efforts going on in your region. So say you're clicking on this link after the live presentation, you've accessed it through our website or somebody shared it on social media. There are prevention providers in your area that can work with your organization or your community to help with prevention, whether it be with someone like Livvy who works with youth and the homeless. For like our point in time counts that's coming up in January, and we need volunteers for things like that. That goes across the state. For domestic violence, for your schools, there's prevention specialists across the state. There are people like Libby across the state. If you guys have any questions, you're welcome to email us. I am, and I'll put it in the chat box too. I am at athompson@occnet.org. And then, Livvy, yours isn't with an L, is it?
ORURUP.
occnet.org. You're welcome to ask us any questions now for our question and answer portion, if you have any. If you don't, like I said, use those emails that are sitting there in the chat, and we're happy to answer any questions. Nothing's coming up yet. Livvy, is there anything else that you want to add? I would love you to give out the information for the drop-in and tell us a little bit about rapid rehousing while we wait on questions if they're coming in, and put our phone number up there for everyone to be able to contact if they know somebody who needs services that you provide.
Yeah, so the best way to contact us if you see a youth or hear of someone who you think we could help is to call or text our 24-hour number. It is 501-282-0292. And I said you can call or text that. You can email me at the email provided. And a lot of the times it'll be another parent at a school who says, like, I've noticed this kid walking home from school, at 3:30 every day, and they just shoot us a quick text about it. Then we can get a hold of the counselors at that school, and, just to try to get background information helps a lot. Sometimes it is a kid who just likes to take walks, and then other times there are issues going on, and we can find out who are good supports to try to handle that. We have street outreach. Who goes into the schools, not right now due to the pandemic, but like at Lake Hamilton and at Lakeside, pretty regularly we would have someone from street outreach go in there and try to build relationships with kids in the school. So if it is a child in the school setting, you can also talk to the counselors. And that text number is also for youth, and actually youth use it a lot more than adults.
Surprise.
I will get random texts just all the time. I saw your number on, this poster. I saw your number on this card, and I just had quick questions. And, it'll start with simple things like, oh, I heard y'all have games in there. Oh, I heard I could come do this. And they slowly build a relationship just by talking, where they're like, okay, yeah, well, I'll come in and check out the place now. And then, oh, okay, yeah, well, I'll give that a shot. And
sure. Where they text you a few times before they actually come and visit, and then they visit a few times before they actually ask you for something, or build a relationship slowly.
Yeah. And we take it at their pace. That's part of being low barriers. There's no expectation when they come in here that they're going to start some kind of program or anything like that. They come in and they just get to be a teenager or a young adult for a while, and then we see what they want to work on, and we try to help them with what their goals already are.
And like you said, you may see a youth or a child or teenager maybe walking down the street after school, and you have what your preconceived notions of what you think is happening to that child, or where they're headed, or what their living situation might be. But it's important to say that the drop-in also serves those who are at risk of experiencing homelessness. So we're talking about kids who right now it's stable, next week it might not be, it's not always stable, it's with aunt right now, and that looks long-term, but maybe not necessarily long-term. And then we're talking about those other factors that we talked about at the beginning. There's substance use happening in the home, and the adults think it's fine and it's safe to do it there, so why don't you? And then that involves the kids. So the kids can be in some sort of unstable environment and still come to you for services, and you're still going to help, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's much easier to stabilize existing housing than to kind of reinvent the wheel. And once they've lost permanent housing, trying to get that going again. So not waiting until it's emergency situation. When someone is having instability with their housing, or instability even within the family, trying to get help as early, trying to get support in place to handle things when it's one or two things that we can provide support before it all falls apart and we're starting from the ground up is super, super important.
Livvey, thank you very much for coming. Anthony says you answered all of his questions. We did so good preparing for this that nobody has any questions. We've answered them all. I do have a hunch that once people click on the link later, we might start getting some emails with questions.